it seems almost yesterday that we were talking about this big dream of the SBR. And here we are making lots of progress. And I'm very honored to have the opportunity to work together with both of you in doing what we can from the industry side. Both of you have done so much amazing work, and I really appreciate it. Looking forward to much more, and I think we will get this over the line, and it will become a reality, and we'll all see the power, the true power that the SBR has. So for those of you in the room who maybe don't know what the SBR is and the importance of it, I would love, Senator Lummis, if you could just help people here in the room understand why the SBR is so important.
Well, I'll explain, Fred, why it's so important to me personally. And I want to thank you for your leadership and for holding this event. We're $37 trillion in debt in this country. When I came to Washington as a member of the U.S. House in 2009, it had just turned from $9 trillion to $10 trillion in debt. And I came because I thought that was alarming to have that level of debt. And now here we are at $37 trillion. The point being, I've never seen a piece of legislation that can help us solve our problem with the debt until the strategic Bitcoin reserve notion came along. So the Senate bill was drafted specifically to address the national debt to this extent. It provided a source of funding, being gold certificates currently held by the U.S. government that could be marked to market, sold into Bitcoin. Then the Bitcoin could be held for 20 years, and it would cut the national debt in half. Now, when RFK Jr. was running for president, he had proposed an even larger strategic Bitcoin reserve than Nick and I are proposing now. And his would have eliminated the debt, but that would have required a much larger reserve. So I'm a baby boomer. I hate the thought of leaving this debt to my children and my grandchildren with absolutely no solution. And yet the entire time I've been in Congress, both parties have continued to run up the debt without care or concern for what we're leaving to the next generation to deal with. So that's my goal behind an SBR. It's a tool, finally, for my generation to say, we messed up, we've overspent, and we want to provide this tool for you, younger generation, to help you get out of the mess we created.
Thank you. Representative Begich, I know you also have great affinity. Obviously, you're working very closely with Senator Lummis on this. Talk to us about what are your motivations for this?
Well, I think Senator Lummis really spelled out why it's so important for us to have what I call an insurance policy on the U.S. dollar. And as we continue to accumulate debt at the levels that we do, at the rate at which we are accumulating debt, it's important for us to recognize that that the dollar and all fiat currency, in fact, is losing value relative to scarce assets. And we see this in Bitcoin, we see this in gold, we see this in silver. Why? Because the market is valuing forced scarcity. That's what we're seeing across all those assets within that asset class of sort of intangible assets, non-intrinsic assets. And so it's a recognition that this continuation of deficit spending is devaluing this fiat currency, and we need a backup plan. So a lot of times we talk about the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And I like to point out, you can't have a currency without reserves. And reserves heretofore have been our gold reserves, and we have the largest gold reserves of any nation worldwide. But I think it's important for us to recognize that what has worked for us in the past as a nation isn't necessarily what's going to work for us in the future. And we need to look at the composition of scarce asset portfolios and recognize that there's a need to pivot into a more diversified scarce asset portfolio on the federal balance sheet. And that's where I think the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve does a great job of augmenting our existing gold reserve strategy.
As we look at how what Bitcoiners call TradFi, how the banks, investment companies, family offices, sovereign wealth funds are starting to take a very active approach to digital assets, and more specifically Bitcoin. We're now even seeing traditional Bitcoin OGs, the old guys, whales, moving their Bitcoin that they've held in cold wallets and putting them into ETFs because now you can do deposit in kind, contribution in kind. This is becoming a huge asset class. And from our perspective, if you look at our market cap as a company, the vast majority of our current market cap is because we sit on billions of dollars of Bitcoin. And it is a strategic reserve for us. We believe, like many other companies, that it's the best place to hold our assets. But internationally and from a national security perspective, the SBR has a huge impact in how the U.S. is able to defend itself financially, right? Let's share a little bit more, Senator Lummis, your thoughts on that piece of it, the national security aspect of this.
Well, even the leaders of the military in the Pacific have told us that having strategic Bitcoin reserve is a geopolitical advantage for the U.S., that it is an important leveler with regard to the strength of the United States geopolitically, especially in the Indo-Pacific area. And some of you may have seen Michael Saylor's presentation on this, which is still available online. I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to review it. The importance of the U.S. dollar, I call our currency, and this I quote an author by the name of, I'm sorry, I forgot his name right now, too early in the morning. He calls our currency the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry. And it's because, yes, we have the strongest fiat currency in the world. We have the best fiat currency in the world. But all fiat currencies are inadequately backed by reserves, to Nick Begich's point. And so as we, Nick Begich is the author. And we need to have something strong behind our currency to back it up. So by having a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we actually are shoring up the U.S. dollar as a reserve asset that is worthy of continuing to be the world reserve currency. And that's absolutely critical because, of course, we're seeing the Chinese use their economic power all over the world to try to change that. And when Britain had the world reserve currency, and then it switched over, it devastated the British economy for a number of years. And so protecting the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency is one of the geopolitical goals of having a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Representative Begich, your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll quote Vivek Ramaswamy, who said, "It's hard to defend a bankrupt nation." And it's very important strategically that we maintain a strong currency that the rest of the world will accept in exchange for goods and services. I mean, this is foundational to the American story since World War II, having that dominant reserve currency that engenders confidence and consensus confidence around the world. And we do that, again, through reserves, right? Through the ability to say, look, this is backed by something tangible that's real, that also has consensus value and has scarcity. So it keeps governments honest. When we came off of the gold standard and that redemption window was closed, That was the moment at which all fiat currencies sort of became completely untethered. Having a strategic Bitcoin reserve allows us to open that window of retethering our dollar to something scarce, and it gives the rest of the world confidence. It actually becomes sort of a self-denying prophecy when we create a Bitcoin reserve, because what we're actually saying is the dollar is strong, and the dollar will remain strong, and the dollar is backed by things that the rest of the world also believes in.
So, as we look at Bitcoin as an asset, obviously we have created a reserve. We have Bitcoin that will hopefully be fully legally put into it now, but we need to add more Bitcoin to it. What are your thoughts, both of you, on how we should go about doing that? What do you think is in the realm of the possible, and what do you think the future will look like, and how we might do that? And I'll start with you, Representative Begich.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that there are many ways that we can acquire Bitcoin. Some of those ways we can purchase Bitcoin actively. We can look at the continued seizure of Bitcoin through legal means, which is how we've acquired most of the Bitcoin that the United States government holds right now.
Most recently, quite a nice little pile.
Significant, yes. I think it was over 120,000 Bitcoin were seized as part of an illegal operation that was happening, if I'm not mistaken, in Cambodia. And so we are now, I believe, the largest nation-state holder of Bitcoin as a result of that most recent seizure. So that will continue. I think that there are some ways that have been spelled out in the Bitcoin Act. But I think there's some other ways that we can look at creatively. One of the things that our offices are exploring is the idea of Project Janus, right? Project Janus is an announcement here just last week that is looking at putting small modular reactors on military bases. Well, when you have stable baseload power, you don't consume all the power that's being produced, right? And so the idea that perhaps you could use some of that excess power as a mechanism to have a public-private partnership with miners, and then utilize that Bitcoin that flows from that directly as a resource for incremental contributions to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. There are things like that we can do. I'm on the Natural Resources Committee in the House. When you talk about geothermal leasing, hydro leasing, natural gas leasing, these are also opportunities for us to rethink the way that we approach royalties, and perhaps take royalties as Bitcoin that would then be contributed to the SPR.
Absolutely. Senator Lummis.
For that reason, I think that the House bill on SBR, which Nick is leading, it has a stronger chance of passing first. The House seems to be more willing to try new things than the Senate is. In addition, Nick's bill has more flexibility. We crafted the Senate bill to prove that you could create a strategic Bitcoin reserve without new money, without borrowing money to create a reserve. And that was why we specifically designed it to show you could take our gold certificates, mark them to market, sell them into Bitcoin, and hold it. But that source is not catching on, I would say. So Nick's bill doesn't provide that kind of specificity with regard to where the money comes from. And now he has just described multiple ways that we could acquire a strategic Bitcoin reserve without direct appropriations. So I think, if I'm guessing correctly, the Begich bill can move first, largely because of the flexibility it provides, and because we're seeing the acquisition via forfeiture and the opportunity created by other means for the U.S. to develop a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You know, the University of Wyoming, my alma mater, and Josh Allen's alma mater, by the way, is mining, and that money is retained for university uses. and we're seeing other institutions do the same.
I think this is a country where we are energy rich, and we have a great opportunity. I think you mentioned royalties from energy assets. You've talked about revaluating the gold certificates as a way of funding the strategic Bitcoin reserve. One of the areas that I'm very excited about being a miner is this ability to leverage energy assets that either are creating what we call idle molecules or electrons without use, such as if you put an SMR on a military base and it's creating baseload energy to take that off. But there are also lots of other energy assets. And I think it's very important from the perspective of a miner that we really find ways to take advantage of this energy, because the time period under which we have the ability to produce a lot of Bitcoin because of the halving cycle gets cut every 4 years, right? And the sooner we can get started, the better it is. And so what would your recommendations be as to what we as industry can do to accelerate the SBR and accelerate our relationships within the various asset owners, for lack of a better term, to get us mining as a country?
Well, I would say use the flexibility of the president's executive order to advise the White House and help David Sachs advise the White House on ways that that can be done starting right now. We can help mining by changing our tax laws in a way that prevents double taxation of Bitcoin mining. Currently, Bitcoin is taxed when it is produced, when it is mined, and then taxed again when it is sold. That's contrary to every other commodity on Earth. So we have to treat Bitcoin like every other commodity on Earth, which is to tax it only when it is sold. So that is something that Congress can do. I'm not on the Finance Committee. I've learned that it's helpful to be on the Finance Committee if you want to affect tax policy. But they did adopt, the Finance Committee has thus far adopted 9 of our recommendations that we put forward in the One Big Beautiful Bill, but then got left behind because of how quickly that bill was moving. But the Senate Finance Committee has adopted all 9 of our recommendations and then added another that deals with the way that foreign investments are handled. So I'm confident they're moving forward. Senator Steve Daines of Montana will be taking the lead on the Republican side of the aisle in the Finance Committee on the taxation issues. And then we have some strong Democrats that understand these issues. And I would point specifically to the ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee as someone who really understands these issues. So those are things we can do to help you help us. But I think the industry is in a great position to advise the White House how to use the confines of the president's executive order to advance an SBR.
I think our industry also sometimes looks at itself as a custodian of energy assets, right? We view, if you think about what Mara does, we really sit at this nexus between energy and compute really to generate value. Some of our peers are now trying to shift their focus to move to HPC and AI. And as we look at the strategic importance of Bitcoin hash rate in the US and mining as much Bitcoin as possible in the US, we are afraid that too many players in the industry are going to chase the capital markets bright shiny object of going after AI and what that does to their valuations versus continue to mine Bitcoin. Granted, mining Bitcoin is a zero-sum game, so it actually helps us that they go do that. But I think it's also important that industry views the incentive of being a Bitcoin miner and really viewing the value of that. And I think as we look at the value of the SBR and the Bitcoin Act and what we can do to make that happen, it truly will give people more of an incentive to focus on the importance of Bitcoin mining. And I think the more we can do to reiterate that publicly is important. As you look at the future now of the SBR, let's pretend it's enacted tomorrow. What's the next step after that? What do we do next?
I think the next step is we start to identify, first you have to create the bucket, right? You have to codify the bucket, and that's what SBR-related legislation allows us to do. Then we start to look at ways that we can, as I was just mentioning a moment ago, with maybe working with the military and with other groups within government, whether that be on that side of the aisle or with respect to natural resource royalty arrangements. You start to look for these vectors, these contributory vectors that can start to help fill up that SBR. And so I think that we start to look at creatively across government to identify what those things can be so that we can build up that strategic reserve at the level that we had identified initially in the Bitcoin Act, which is 1 million Bitcoin. Why? Because it represents about 5% of all Bitcoin to be produced, which is a corollary to the amount of gold that we have. We have about 5% of the world's gold on the U.S. balance sheet. So it's about finding ways creatively and with some urgency, as you were just pointing out, to help us get to that target goal.
Senator Lummis, any thoughts on what's Act 2?
Yeah, I think it's important that the U.S. act sooner rather than later. Because of hash rate changes, obviously the value is going to go up faster, so those who get in early are going to be able to get in at a price that will continue to go up. The UAE is looking at it. Texas has codified its strategic reserve, so has Arizona. So we're seeing other governments move in this direction. We're also seeing governments who are more nimble just because they have Captain Picards who can just make it so instead of a democratic republic that moves so slowly. And so those countries like the United Arab Emirates that get into this sooner are going to see the more explosive growth in their assets. I think we will see sovereign wealth countries or governments that have sovereign wealth funds specifically allocate certain portions of their diversified investment allocation into Bitcoin specifically, perhaps other digital assets, but I think primarily Bitcoin because it has proven its growth curve, and now we have sufficient history behind us to watch that growth curve become more predictable over time, and now that people have been able to chart it, we can be more clear about what to expect from it in the future, which allows governments and family offices and sovereign wealth funds and endowments to understand how to allocate within the whole spectrum of investable assets. So you have some assets that produce short-term reserves for your immediate spending needs and other assets that are long-term stores of solid value. And that's where you want an allocation to Bitcoin. So I think as time goes on, you are going to see more understanding, more investment advisors who advise huge endowments, who advise countries and their sovereign wealth funds, and who advise individual investors into how to place an allocation into Bitcoin and gold and other hard assets. So that allocation at the end of their portfolio that requires a solid long-term investment with superior growth potential to be part of the allocation.
I know we're running out of time, but just I think two other little comments on that. One is Tether, obviously one of the largest stablecoin issuer, also wants to be the biggest Bitcoin miner in the world. That says something. They're also investing in gold mining and gold assets. So I think that says something about the importance of having access to Bitcoin mining as a way to leverage things in your business. And we are seeing countries like Sweden even, of all places, introducing bills to try and build a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So hats off to both of you for all the hard work you do. We really appreciate it. Whatever we can do to help you, please call on us. We're there for you. And let's get this bill passed.
Thank you, Fred.
Sorry, one comment.
One quick comment, and I think it stitches together our entire conversation, and it stitches together the sovereign wealth fund activity that you're seeing, and activity within nation states, and that is, we have a fiduciary responsibility for the nation and the people of our nation, and that fiduciary responsibility means that we don't look backward, we look forward, and as we look forward, we say, what is the environment of tomorrow going to look like? And how do we prepare the United States to be a robust, solid player in the geopolitical space? And this is part of that future visioning effort and action to ensure that we are being good fiduciaries for the American taxpayer, the American citizen. And I think that's what we're seeing across the world, both within sovereign wealth funds and within nation states that are saying, this is going to be the future. Let's position ourselves to be players.
And Nick, my generation owes it to your generation to do this, to be a more sound fiduciary than we have been thus far.
Hear, hear. Thank you.